transporting cars filled with fuel it isn't ours, and wearing cotton we didn't grow.
One evening after dinner, in the summertime, my dad and a cousin of his who was living with us, John Huppy, decided to take Mick and I on a snipe hunting trip. We went out across the creek and they sat us up in the woods out there with a gunny sack, each of us with a gunny sack, which is a sack that you put grain and potatoes in. And they went out to chase the snipes up to us, and we were supposed to catch them. I had no clue what the snipe was even, what it looked like. I guess it's some kind of a bird now that I've grown up and know about it. Anyway, Mick says this is just a joke they're playing on us. She says, "Come on, let's run home." So the two of us raced back to the house, and Mom hid us in the back room, and in came my dad and his cousin, laughing and joking about how they had suckered us into catching snipe, only to find out that we left them as the jokers. So much for snipe hunting. I have seen a snipe since then. They're kind of a weird looking bird. Anyway, so much for snipe hunting. Don't let anybody talk you into going snipe hunting.
Tattooed on his left arm, spent a little more in the store for a tag, and the back it says USA. Won't buy nothing that he can't fix. With WD-40 and a Craftsman wrench, he ain't president. He's just made in America.
I don't know how much of a pain in the butt I was to my mom, but the school law says that you have to be 6 years old before the 1st of October before you can start school. But I was just 5 in March, and she took me off to school, and I lasted about a week, and the county school superintendent came out and asked my age, and I told her, and she says, "When's your birthday?" And I told her, and she said, "You're out of here." Well, that was in '33, the heart of the Depression, and we moved from Hubbard, Oregon to Macksburg, Oregon. And the first day we were there, my mother took me to school, and she talked the school teacher into taking me into the first grade. And so I started the school at the age of 5. And I didn't get kicked out of school until I was in high school, and that was during the war, and we had a woman bus driver, and her son was a rabble-rouser on the bus, and he had taken a pocket knife and he cut the leather seat across the back of the bus, and I got blamed for it, so I got kicked out of school again. But they finally decided I wasn't guilty, and so I survived school for the rest of my life. But anyhow, I did get kicked out once.
Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Sometimes it feels like this world's gone crazy. Grandpa, take me back to yesterday, when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. Did lovers really fall in love to stay and stand beside each other, come what may? Is promise really something people kept, not just something they would say? Families really bow their heads to Daddy's really never.
My sister Mickey and we called her Marion then. Mickey came along after she got into high school. I don't know where they picked that up, but they did. Anyhow, we walked together to school. It was a 1 mile or a little over both ways. It was uphill. She got me a book by Emily Post on manners, which my folks made me read against my will. I was a slow learner. A neighbor said happy birthday and I said same to you. Wrong. Then at the table I was a reacher. Never asked to pass, just reached out. She threatened me with a glass of water in my face if I reached across the table again. I couldn't wait to get that big biscuit down the line. I got a glass of water in my face and Mom and Dad just grinned. Mama's darling and Daddy's delight, Mickey.
Go away. Oh, oh, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Everything is changing fast. We call it progress, but I just don't know. And Grandpa, let's wander back into the past, then paint me the picture.
Was born just a couple years after I was, but I remember Jerry's birth in January of '39. I was almost 11 years old, and he was born at home. I had no clue that my mom was pregnant. Dad calls me to get up before the regular 6 a.m. time. He says, "You've got a baby brother down here." And I thought, what a way to get a guy out of bed early in the morning. And about that time, I heard a wah, 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 and I, criminy sakes, I took those stairs at 90 miles an hour. And so for the next 6 years, I carried him on my shoulders, rode him on my bicycle with him on my shoulders. He's got many miles up there. I don't pick him up anymore. Unlike tractors, horses don't have a switch. They don't have a steering wheel. You control them by what is called lines or reins, which are usually made of leather. And they pull on a bit in their mouth, and you turn them by pulling one side or the other. Anyway, complicated little system. But anyhow, Paul and I each had a team run away on us in our lifetime. And they run away because you lose control of the lines, kind of like letting go of the steering wheel and losing your brakes. Well, anyhow, I was on a wagon. We were hauling hay, and Dad was pitching the shocks or stacks of hay onto the wagon, and I would level it out and tromp it down and build it up into a load. And the wagon, was 4 wheels, and it was probably 7 foot by 15 foot, and it had racks on the end to keep it from falling off of the front or back. And you would take the reins from the horses and tie them to the front rack, and then you'd walk forward, and when you'd move to the next shock, why, you'd say giddy up to the horses, and then they'd go ahead. Well, the horses had on what they called a blinder on their head, so they weren't supposed to be able to look back, but the old farts would outsmart you and they would look back. And when they'd see Dad start to walk up to the next shock, they would move up to it. Anyhow, we had a full load and I was near the back end of the load, and Dad evidently started walking forward and the horses took off and I almost fell off the back end of the load. And we yelled, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," and the horses got excited and they took off. And by the time I crawled to the front of the load, why, I got there and there was only one line. Well, if you pull on one line, you're going to go in a circle. And I finally reached over the edge and got the hold of the second line. By this time, the horses had got into a trot and were really moving down the field at a pretty good clip. And by the time I did get that second line, we went between the chicken house and the hog house and were headed straight for the house. I don't know where we would have turned, but we hit the fence, and I got the lines about the same time and we came to a halt. So much for my venture. We'll tell you about Paul's later. Okay, when you're raised on a farm, there's always chores to do. And once I became old enough to squeeze and pull at the same time, the first chore in the morning was to arrive out of bed at 6 a.m. and go with Mom down to the barn, and Dad, of course, was already there, and we'd milk the cows. It took from 3 to 5 minutes per cow. First one fed the cows some hay so that they became contented cows from Oregon. It took 3 to 5 minutes to milk a cow. In the summertime, when the flies would be bad, they'd bite the cows, and so they'd switch their tails around and smack you in the face. It wasn't too bad unless one of them had a little shit on its tail, and that became a sorry mess. Anyway, you learn to swear early in life. Blasted cows. We also had sheep and pigs to feed. The milk from the cows was separated in a cream separator, which was a kind of a centrifuge that you turned by hand, and that separated the milk, the cream from the milk, and you sold the cream, and the skim milk was fed to the pigs.
Some bright morning when this life is over, I'll fly away to that home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away.
About growing up on a farm, in 1933, the Great Depression hit, and we moved up to Lower Highland to the farm. We had no electricity, no running water. Our outhouse was about 75 feet from the house. We carried a lantern, coal oil lantern, to the barn for lights. In the house we had kerosene lamps, and that's the way we lived. The well was just off of the porch, 33 feet deep. We pulled the water out of there in a 2.5 gallon bucket on a pulley. And Monday morning was wash day, so before we left for school, on Mondays, we filled up Mom's 3 rinse waters, and the stove was filled with water to heat on the cook stove. And we had to run a couple of batches of wash before we left for school. Our school bus came by at 7:30 in the morning, and we did all the chores and everything before we left for school, so we had to hurry and get cleaned up and dressed and ready to go. Evening chores were a repeat. However, we had about 27 acres of ground in cultivation, And when I was 13, I learned to plow, which was a big mistake. I should have never learned that chore. To plow, we had what was called a hand plow. It was pulled by two horses, and it plowed 14 inches wide and cut about 7 or 8 inches deep and turned the soil over. Dad would plow during the day, and when I got home from school, it was change clothes and get out and plow until it was dark. What happened? Then you do chores again, milk the cows, and go through that. Dad also worked out in the sawmill and for other farmers in the area, so that in the summer I worked with him on the farms in Karis and later on worked in the shipyards. Dad worked at Vanport and then the shipyards. And Mom and I ran the farm as he lived in Portland during the building of Vanport and also at Oregon Ship. I worked the summer of '44 at Oregon Ship, and I was a sheet metal worker. We drove on a little bus from the farm to Portland and back in the evening.
I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away in the...
Mick was Mom's helper. Mom, spent so much time out helping Dad and I with chores, and Paul, the four of us would be out, and she would be in cooking breakfast and doing all those chores. And she was a great help, worked in the garden. As you know, she liked gardening. But I always tell a story on Mick that I like to relate. My bedroom for a while was at the top of the stairs on the right-hand side. And those days, of course, we didn't have any electricity, and they didn't trust us kids carrying lamps around, and so you memorized just exactly how to get to your room and how to find the bed and that. And my bed was just inside. It was to the right at the top of the stairs, and the bed was immediately on the left. And of course, the bed didn't have much of a bottom on it, the foot end. And so I would bail up the stairs as hard as I could because it was cold and you wanted to get under the covers. And then I'd just leap over the back end of the bed and crawl in bed and cover up. And Mick, of course, she was the housekeeper, and so what does she do? She moves my bed to the other side of the room. And man, I go screaming up those stairs in the dark, and I'd leap and take a full face landing on the floor. She'd move that cotton picking bed to the other side of the room. Crash landing in the dark. More bad words that I said.
When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away.
Yeah, my brother Paul was 2.5 years younger than I, and he had red hair. And my mom took a lot of flack because, my dad didn't have red hair, and my uncle didn't have red hair. But we had some neighbors down the street that had red hair, and I didn't know what that was all about. But anyhow, she did take a lot of flack. I can remember that plain. But Paul's red hair sometimes got the best of him, and as a teenager he would rise up and want to fight or wrestle or something like that. And he and I would have many a tangle. One Christmas, Mick and I were making Christmas things, and Paul was supposed to go to the barn with Mom and Dad and help with the chores, and we were supposed to be left alone. And Paul snuck away from them, and he came up to the house, and he wanted in, and we had the door locked. And it was a door with glass in it, and he got mad, and he punched that glass out. And needless to say, we let him in then, and Mick and I kind of patched the window up and pulled a curtain over it, and Dad and Mom came in from doing chores, and there was a little sink just inside the door, the pail of water, and Dad went to wash his hands, and my dad could feel a draft. If you cracked a window a half inch, he could tell it. And he went over to that window and looked, and where's Paul? And we had him hid. And Dad finally found him, and boy, did he give him a paddling. he got the works. Anyhow, so much for Paul and his temper.
Fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away.
Country western song about the putting on miles on trucking on your knees. And in front of the house at home, why, there was 5 big maple trees. And Paul and I had miles and miles of highways built, and on our knees we pushed our little toy cars and tractors and whatnot. And there on the ground and wore the knees out of our pants. And then we got a red wagon. Paul got a red wagon when he was maybe 2 years old. And we were in Maxburg then. I was 5. And come Christmas, and this John Huppy, nephew or cousin of my dad's, he and Dad pulled a good one. John put on a sheepskin jacket wrong side out and had gunny sacks wrapped around his legs to make it look like he had, I don't know what it was supposed to be, but I can remember it plain. And he brought for Christmas this bag of stuff, and he reached in and he gave Mick and I each a bundle of switches, willow switches to spank you with. That was our Christmas gift. But Paul got a little red wagon, and it was a nice little red flyer. And later on, when we were up on the place at Highland, why, Paul and I put on miles and miles and miles on that front porch with that little red wagon in the wintertime. When it'd be raining out, why, we could go out and play on that porch and put each other down and see who could take the corner the fastest and who could pile up in the bushes in the flower beds when we couldn't make the corner. Anyhow, Paul and I had a lot of fun times in our life playing there with our trucks and cars and